welcome. We're so glad that you're joining us. Um, we are wanting to talk today and possibly another studio talk because on the same topic, because it's a big topic. And we're talking about drishti or gazing. And, you know, Richard and I talk a lot about the internal forms of yoga. And we talk of them as breathing, which we go into all the time a lot, and the bandhas, and mudra,
and
drishti.
drishti. Yeah, I kind of learned it, drishti bandha mudra.
Yeah.
Then I forget,
Yeah.
because that takes you
And
in.
the breathing, yeah.
Yeah.
But so it's an important part of the yoga practice. But when you think about the drishti or the gaze, it's what we do as human beings from the time we're tiny. And when we are engaged in anything all day, all night, even, we have internal drishti going on with visions. And so we start looking at the depth of drishti, which is just anything from what one might do lying out by the beach or lying out in the forest and looking up at the sky and sort of gazing rather than an intense looking. The gaze has this quality to it that is quite different from just an intense manner of looking. And the human body and we as humans really relax when we can look in that way. And that's also the quality that occurs when you look into another person's eyes and you connect deeply with that person through the eyes, as if the eyes are sort of, windows from some, world,
magic.
within each of you that's connecting. And so there's this huge amount of content and embodiment that goes along with drishti. And what we're trying to do today is really look at it from the perspective of how it relates to yoga, and then a few stories about what the drishti is and what it means, and then also what it feels like, how we embody different forms of drishti, and how that can either inform our practice or how it can inform everyday life. So we were wanting to sort of look at, well, how does the drishti impact us in the asana, the meditation? What does that have to do with those practices?
Right. So rather than they are, well, I don't know, suppose, but they are the practice.
Yeah.
And so in the asana practice or the vinyasa practice, the common drishtis are, nasagra, you're gazing at the end of your nose, or just down, depends on your size of your nose. And that doesn't mean necessarily focusing, unless you're very nearsighted, or you're gazing bhrumadhya, between your eyebrows, and or parshva, you're looking off to the side, or just upwards or downwards, or there's even you're gazing internally, which is a common term, which is more likely the imagination becomes active, but you're still using visual cues internally. And it goes on and on too, where we ask someone to gaze at their big toe in Paschimottanasana. And always, it's a gaze once it's a, so to speak, a friendly gaze. So you're not staring at it as if to make it burst into flames, but you're kind of just softening your whole palate and mouth, and which leads me to thinking that gazing has a lot to do with the cranial nerves. And so, as we know from our pranayama practice, that the front of the foremost cranial nerve, coming straight out of the brain, so it's not mediated through spinal cord or anything, is the olfactory bulb. And if you are doing the swara breathing and you really breathe in deeply, and you just fill up as if you're smelling something wonderful, hopefully wonderful, depending on
where you are.
and you just pull in that last little bit and you go, ah. And that's right up, straight back behind here. There's the highest frontal sinus, and that's where, I got what they call the earth breath. I've pulled up and I can smell this wonderful thing. But right behind it, in the cranial nerves, is the optic nerve, which are just the backs of each eyeball, where the retina kind of forms, and then it becomes the optic nerves, which I believe cross right at the pituitary gland and are dominant in the opposite sides of the brain. And so this is quite profound, particularly if you've ever had retina problems. Then you go, oh. But then right behind it is what is the ocular motor?
Yeah.
And this is the third cranial nerve, and this is of extreme interest in the actual practices, because it has to do with motor, meaning movement. So it has to do not so much with the optic nerve, but with all of the other nerves that control all of the eye muscles around you. And so if I look over to the right side, it then automatically, you can almost hear the mechanism click in. The head turns to the right. Oh, it's like magic. And if I look up, then the head follows. And so and this is actually very helpful in terms of survival.
And the ocular motor nerve, works to control the eyelids, and it controls the size of the pupils.
Oh, even
and
that.
Then there are two other nerves that also help with the movement of the eyeballs. I think the fourth and the sixth, and they so that the gazing, in terms of nerve function and the amount of sort of nerve attention that's given to the gaze, the body knows those things are pretty important.
If it stimulates a whole muscular pattern, which corresponds to a prana or sensation pattern, that's amazing. And most of the time, of course, we're unaware of sensation patterns and breath patterns from what we're doing. But here's a wonderful tool that'll take you right into it, deeply.
And you all know this, but also with the gaze in the yoga asana or in sitting, as Richard said, with the Nasagra Drishti or any of them, there's this sensation, and it's almost as if you are looking from somewhere behind the eyeballs, which actually is where the nerves are, but that you're looking without a sense of, sort of exclusion of other things. And yet it is very focused. So it's this paradoxical ability to look broadly and with precision at the same moment, in a sense, to see the background and the foreground simultaneously, and to really, therefore, not become not become distracted by either foreground or background.
Right, and the kind of the initial gaze is kind of like I want to exclude the background and just like focus my mind, on and but then the drishti actually becomes where I'm paying attention. Uh, it's more like a deeper attention where I'm completely aware visually and then throughout the body of everything around the kind of central steadiness or focus of the eye, and that's 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 important.
And so we were talking also yesterday about the ability to keep that gaze within the asana. Like sometimes people come to class and they say, well, is it okay to practice with my eyes closed? Or occasionally someone will show up and put a blindfold on. And that's an interesting kind of practice. And what you do see from time to time is that people, or I certainly have had this myself, when I am feeling more scattered or less grounded and I come to practice, it's much more difficult to allow the gaze to settle. At the same time, you don't want to force the gaze to settle. And so what the mistake that we sometimes see or make ourselves is that we try to control the gaze in a sense, kind of like people try to control other things in life or the prana or other parts of the practice. So it's not necessarily just, get back here gaze. And yet it's also not this dreamy gaze. And so the two ends of that stick that we get trapped by are going into practice and, looking over at the refrigerator and looking over at the phone and letting the gaze be kind of all over the place. And what that does is then it triggers the entire nervous system. And
into all the stories of, I wonder what's in the refrigerator. Yeah. I've never had that. But,
that's why you practice on the third floor, way away from the fridge.
Exactly. Yeah, and so it's and when someone comes to class and it's so powerful that there's sometimes people you want to they should wear a blindfold because that's gonna be an excellent for their situation, or someone who, if they open their eyes, there are schools where you always close your eyes, just like in meditation. There are eyes closed schools and then there are eyes open schools, and of course we like the half closed or half open schools, but they're both useful in different contexts. And so these are tools rather than something you have to adhere to, too strictly. And so often at first, we want to be a good student, and so I'm going to gaze at the tip of my nose until I'm enlightened. And the poor nose, and and usually you can tell by the expression of someone the quality of their gaze, because the rest of the face, the gashing of teeth and the sound of the breath, reveal the quality of gaze.
And in the Ashtanga system, for those of you who practice Ashtanga, there are suggested gazing points for pretty much every posture. And this is good because it's a way when the gaze is steady, then the mind is more likely to be steady. But the drawback to that is that we then can become stuck in saying, well, I have to always gaze, to the left when I'm twisting to the left, whereas it turns out that sometimes gazing to the right when you're twisting to the left can have a profound impact on everything, not only your flexibility in the movement itself, but particularly on the mind state and the ability to relax. And so the gazing points, the drishti that are recommended, that's what they are. They're recommended. They're not necessarily that you will lose merit if you don't look at those particular drishtis. It's important to really pay attention to the drishti. That's what's being underscored there.
Yeah, and both Krishnamacharya and Patabi Joyce were actually flexible with the drishtis, believe it or not, and because it could be, you know, a brilliant move just to turn your eyes in the opposite because of the effect on the body. And so just the term Atma Drishti, what should I be looking at? Oh, the Atman. Oh, the Swa-Atma. So you look at the self of the self, the true self. And that's what you should be looking at. And it's what you're looking at anyway, but you don't realize it.
Yeah. So it's a thing, the drishti within the asana is a good thing to play with, and it's a good thing to sort of have some attention to, but also not become sort of too dogmatic about. And that quality of that softness, like if you even think about it right now, you can, and imagine that you're gazing at the screen here, if your eyes are open, that you feel this sense of softness and broadness that is this, what we sometimes call an innocent gaze. And it's a gaze where you are looking really without the separation within your mind of the subject, yourself, and the object that you're looking at. Those things they're not one, but they're not two. So they're not completely merged, but they are somehow unified. And that is, you know, a skill in looking at theory and ideas and other people that is really important to cultivate in a life where you are aiming at interfacing with others and being of service to others, and in a life where you are wanting to, you know, see what you can do to bring a little more tenderness into the world. And so if you think of what that feels like, there is a term that's used in yoga that's called lotus eyes. And it's such a beautiful term. And in a way, it's what is the classic look of what a little tiny baby has when they first pop out from their mother's womb. And they have this, their eyes are just open and able to engage slightly, and then drink in everything that's there before them. And as we get older and older, this capacity can be cultivated. And so in yoga, this is a huge compliment when we're said to, you know, have or to cultivate lotus eyes.
Right, and in mythology, of course, Vishnu is the one with the lotus eyes.
And there's a wonderful story about Vishnu and his lotus eyes. And this is the story of, you know, a time in the history of the devas and the demons when for thousands of years, which is always the case in those mythologies, there's
sometimes
been many more than thousands.
Just what appears to be eternity.
So there had been all this conflict, and Vishnu was, you know, trying to hold it together, trying to get things so that they could be settled in the world, so that things were not so awful, and had been really, really doing everything he could, and realized that he needed help. And he decided what he needed to do was really ask Shiva if he could get some aid in bringing some, you know, some peace to the world.
Yeah, and this was basically the ability to deal with these demonic monsters with their huge egos
Yeah.
that were actually had taken over a lot of things.
Yeah. So things weren't growing, and people were suffering profoundly, and
yeah, the environment was completely trashed.
Yeah, this sounds familiar. So he, Vishnu decided that he really needed help, and he decided he would do these sort of offerings for Shiva, and would chant and chant. So again, in this story, different stories tell it differently, but thousands of years he chanted, trying to get Shiva to come and give him some help. And still, he didn't appear. Shiva did not appear. And so at one point, Vishnu thought, well, what I will do is, I know that Shiva loves lotus flowers, and he has, thousands of names, so that one thing I can do is, on a daily basis, create a Shiva lingam, and then chant each of Shiva's name, and then each time I name him, I will put a lotus flower on the Shiva lingam in honor of that particular name. So he did this practice day in and day out, 1,000 names of Shiva, chanting them, placing a lotus flower where it needed to be. And it was, he did this for a long, long time. And he then, this one day, was getting ready to do it, and he did it, and it went beautifully. And then he had this habit, which was very precise, and that was at the end of each session of chanting these 1,000 names, he would go and double check to make sure that he'd gotten all the names and that there were 1,000 lotus.
So he was he was OCD without the D.
Yeah, it wasn't a disorder.
Well, yeah.
It still isn't.
Yeah, look at
if you talk to me.
Yeah.
It's a benefit. So he triple checked. And suddenly he thought, oh dear, I've done this thousands of times for him.
There's only 999.
Yeah. So he didn't know, and he was dismayed and thinking, if this particular one doesn't work, all of the other times that I've done this ritual will amount to nothing, and I will have, kind of had a problem here. So he was very dismayed.
He didn't have the lotus.
He didn't. There were no more lotus flowers anywhere around, and so he started thinking about it and thinking about the names of Shiva, and then suddenly he remembered, oh well, people have some extra names for me, and one of the names that they have for me is that my eyes are lotus eyes, so the one with lotus eyes. And so he thought, oh, bingo. And he took out one of his eyes and he placed it in place of a lotus upon the Shiva lingam. And it turned out to be the most, resplendent and beautiful and, amazing flower among all of those. And it was just a beautiful finish to this offering. Well, it turns out, meanwhile, that Shiva had almost come several times to help in this situation, but had really wanted to let Vishnu work things out a little bit on his own, but also to show his devotion. And when he was on this very last offering, when Vishnu was on this last offering, Shiva had snuck down and taken one of the flowers away.
He stole
it as a sort of test to see how devoted, and how honest that Vishnu was. And so when it turns out that he was so honest and so devoted that he, gave his own eye, Shiva immediately appeared and immediately said to him, this is just an amazing thing you've done. And he started healing the world. And the first act, of course, was to heal Vishnu's eye and let his vision return.
Oh, yeah.
But then he gave him a tool that he could use to help people number one, have better drishti, have better vision and clarity of view, and number two, to defend themselves. And so this is an important thing, in that this is where the additional meaning of drishti starts to come into play, which is drishti meaning not only the quality of one's gaze and the actual point at which one is gazing, but also
the accuracy, the intelligence.
Yeah, the dharma and the intelligence and the meaning of what one's view in life is. So not with the eyes, but one's view of the world. And so he gave him the Sudarshan.
Sudarshan.
Yeah.
Sudarshan chakra. And of course, as you know, of course, chakra means a wheel. And Su is good or divine. Darshan is the vision. So that is the great illuminating division, which is the wheel of time, also called the Kala Chakra in certain countries. And it's kind of, some people look at it as the ultimate weapon. And it's one you'll see, and Vishnu always has it on his finger, and it's spinning, and it's like a boomerang. He'll toss it, and it'll it'll remove the head of a demon, which is of course symbolic of their complete misunderstanding and confusion.
And often they're symbolic of their enlightenment, because they get rid of their mind.
Yeah, it has anyone who is fortunate enough to get the Sudarshan chakra to remove this troublesome bauble at the top of their spine is
liberated.
Is liberated. So if we get lucky, if this studio talk is bad enough, then maybe we'll And so how does that chakra work?
So the chakra has two, sort of spinning blades, almost if you think of them like an electric saw, these spinning blades going in opposite directions. And they have 108, sort of teeth on each one going, one against the other. And so essentially anything that needs to be dealt with is dealt with through this complementary opposite action of these two interfacing tools of precision, of seeing clearly, and of having a good view of things. And one of the things that we often don't see, and this is true for all of us, is what's right before our eyes. We have all these ideas about life and meaning and all of these other things in the past and the future, but then what's happening right here, right now? And often that's where we drop, the intelligence, is to see what's before us.
Yeah, we're often quite scared of right before our eyes.
Yeah.
But the term for right in front of your eyes is aksha is the eye, and ya aksha, or coming, that which comes right before your eyes, as the present moment, as the immediate experience. And so, of course, that's for most people rather scary, because the life is dedicated to not seeing what's going on. Because then it's hard to be, not only it's hard to be really mean, but it's hard to not be selfish.
It's hard to let go of one's own image of oneself as the center of the universe, or if not the center of the universe, just as an entity that's separate from other beings. Yeah. And that's impossible to hold on to if you really see what is right before your eyes.
Right. And so, of course, the classic yaksha that I love is the Kenopanishad. But there's another story, but there's so many stories of yakshas, and then you come to a place like Southeast Asia or here in Thailand. Yakshas they're all over the place.
And they're the reminder to wake up.
Yeah, and they're outside of temples, and usually they're represented as rather fierce, and but a long time ago there was a very famous yaksha, um, and this is in the Mahabharata, which is the very long book, which talks about which is the story of it's the story of the universe basically, but it's the story of the Pandavas and the battle of Kurukshetra, and then the Bhagavad Gita is one little chapter in the Mahabharata, and so this is earlier in the book. The five brothers, the Pandavas, have through a slight mistake that the eldest brother, Yudhishthir, who's a hero, he's good.
He's a good guy.
But he made a little gambling mistake, and he lost his entire kingdom because he was the rightful king to his evil cousin, who was really bad. And they were exiled to the forest for about 12 years. And in their exile, they had to keep a low profile. So people didn't know, oh, there's the correct king and his family off in the forest. So they had, and so somewhere near the end of that 12 years, they had survived, and they were also off in the forest, and there was it a deer?
No, yes, there was a deer.
Yeah, there was a deer running through the forest, but it had entangled in its antlers, these sticks for a fire sacrifice that somehow, and these were sticks that were necessary for a very important fire sacrifice that this one Brahmin wanted to do as part of, to maintain everything.
And the sticks were used to start the fire, so that it wasn't that any other sticks could work. These were these sticks.
And so there was this distressed Brahmin who, this deer had come and wrecked, the whole thing, and so he really wanted to do it. So the Pandavas went off looking for the deer because they were going to help this great Brahmin find them, and I think it was Yudhishthir who got really overwhelmed because he was the eldest.
Yeah.
He was already a senior citizen, and I think he just had to sit down and go lie down and said, "I can't go on," and so the four of them they said, well, we should rest from this pursuit, and they sent the youngest one of them. Was that Nakula?
Yeah.
So he was the youngest of the brothers. They said, can you go find this deer?
Or find the deer and find the sticks.
Yeah. And so he went looking, and what happened was he came across this big pond of water, this reservoir of water, of really nice looking drinking water. And he was extremely thirsty because he had been going through the forest and desperate for it. And he ran down and said, oh, I'll just drink a lot of good water here. And he ran down to the water, and there was a crane standing next to the water, balanced on one leg and doing what they call bakasana. And just before he was about to drink the water, the crane said, wait, answer my questions before you drink the water. And he couldn't wait. Nakula couldn't wait, and he said, nope. And he drank the water, and he died just a few minutes after that, and just lay there dead on the bank of the pond.
Yeah.
And so the brothers, and then he didn't come back, and so they sent the next brother and the next brother, and they finally sent Arjuna, who was the one slightly younger than Yudhishthir, and all of those four brothers, they couldn't wait to drink, and the crane said, "Wait, before you drink, answer my questions." And they said, "Okay, after I drink." And all of them died, and they were dead. And then Yudhishthir was there, and nobody was coming back, and he thought, "Uh-oh, what's happened to them?" And so he gets up, and he goes down, and he finds, his four dead brothers, and it's like kind of a shock. And he starts to say, "Oh, I got to take a drink." And then, just before he's about to drink, the crane says, "Wait, before you drink, just answer my questions." And Yudhishthir, who's like very with it, he said, "What are your questions?"
And then the crane had like 125 questions.
125 questions.
So he was a little thirsty by the end, but it was, like sort of a parallel to the Holy Grail, where you have these questions when you're in search of something, and if you answer them correctly, you're given,
Again, there's an incredible body of teachings.
Yeah.
And
they were wonderful questions. Things like, who makes the sun, and where does the sun, why does the sun set? And, the sun sets because of Dharma. And, and somehow he gets all of the questions right. And there's one we love in particular that's very famous.
It's the most famous one. And the question was, what's the most amazing thing? And so Yudhishthir said, well, the most amazing thing is that at every moment, endless numbers of living beings are dying. And yet those who are still alive don't ask.
And they imagine that they're immortal.
Yeah, and they imagine they're not going to die.
Yeah.
And so they go around, ignoring that truth of impermanence.
Yeah.
And he got the answer right. And and there's
and so he then when he got through all of the questions, that one was near the end, he was delighted. He was allowed to drink some water, and as he drank the water, then the crane revealed himself
as a yaksha.
And in addition, as his own father.
Yeah.
Right? And so it turns out that the crane revealed that the
father is named Yama.
Yeah.
Who is the god of death. And in this mythology, Yama is actually a great teacher. And
rather than the Grim Reaper.
Yeah, he's not the Grim Reaper at all, but he's an eager teacher, but he's
really there to teach the notion of...
literally his father in the mythology.
And to teach the notion that impermanence is right before our eyes, that's, emptiness. Yeah. And that is this amazing and wonderful thing that we forget over and over. And we're always looking at what's right before our eyes, and then we say, just take that away so I can see impermanence, or take that away so I can see
my concept of
my concept of impermanence. And so when he answered the questions correctly, he said, well, I can bring one of your brothers back to life. Which one would you?
Yeah, you have to choose between your brothers and these are, of course, like impossible, horrible questions. And so, but Yudhishthir said, bring Nakula back. That was the youngest one, because the two youngest ones are actually his half-brothers.
Right.
And he was saying, this is because that way my stepmother, she will have one of her sons alive, well, and my mother will have one of her sons alive. And so
that was such a wise
generous
decision
and wise.
that, of course, thankfully, all the brothers were then given their lives back. And
Right, because he proved to be such a
yeah, such
clear,
clear thinker.
skillful, yeah. And then all of the brothers came back.
And so this is this kind of tipping point where the quality of gaze and the ability to see beyond, what we sometimes imagine to be the what's blocking our view of what's important, to see really what's right before your eyes and see that those things we see as blocking our view or as obstacles, that they are really contingent on being seen through in order to give us clear vision, and that they indeed are part of the background. And so we come, in a modern sense, we come to looking at things that are in the foreground or in the background, and we tend to be able to, like on a camera, you can get a nice blurry background and then the sharp picture in the front. And we separate things out in that way. And somehow the clearest of vision is being able to have this clear vision of the foreground with the background blurry, and a clear vision of the background with the foreground blurry, almost at the same time. And when you think of those two things, it's like, going a step beneath it, it is looking at what insight really is the ability to see not only through, but beyond, and to put things in context, to have, to have intelligence in that manner.
Yeah. So you're able to focus on the immediate situation, which we could call the foreground, or even visually, you have like the one thing but then once you're focused, then you have to move on to where you're including the background of the situation, the immediate background, where it came from, what it's going, and all of that. And then you keep going, and that's the open. And so it's like a lotus flower opening, where the flower is gorgeous, from the center of the flower out. And so that's, which reminds me of Samyak.
Oh, Samyak Drishti.
Samyak Drishti.
Yeah.
So there's the what's called the Arya Ashtanga Marg, which is, so if you're an Ashtanga yoga practitioner, this is what you should learn. And it's also called the Eight Noble Truths of the Arya, or that those who are noble.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so the first one is in Sanskrit, it's samyak, which means sam is altogether, and yak means so it means precise, or right on.
Yeah.
Drishti, correct drishti. And of course that's, for most people, that means you have to have the right philosophical understanding. But for us, we like to.
Well, you need that. Plus,
your actual drishti has something to do with your philosophical gymnastics and motions and connections that the mind makes to see or to appreciate what we call samyak drishti. You're appreciating emptiness, or openness, or interpenetration. And then, don't they go on? Yeah.
Yeah. And so then there are like right aspirations, so your intentions, having that correct, and then speech, and I think,
Oh yeah,
livelihood.
speech is language. Yeah.
Yeah, so all of them unfold, the livelihood and the actions that unfold, but they all, as these things do, they unfold from having the right view.
Yeah.
And the right view really is only accessible, it seems, in an embodied sense, when you have that feeling of softness combined with precision, and so that you cultivate that through the practices that we do. And one of the ways that you really cultivate it is to, as we said in the very beginning, where you are really feeling what it feels like in the body when the when the mind starts to settle, when the physical sensations in the body uh, are not tense, when the lips are soft, when the palate is released, the tongue is soft, and noticing how tension in the jaw, in the neck, in the tongue, etc., how that impacts your own vision. So even as you sit here right now, and if you tense your jaw or squeeze your tongue,
bite your teeth,
you can feel that all of that is impacting how you are able to use your eyes. And so the practices are really this layering and overlayering and relayering of these physical and mental and emotional layers of sensation and intelligence working together rather than just relying on samyak drishti, meaning, well, you have the Vedas and you've learned them, which is a great thing, but it's beyond that is how do you then embody that and take that into the world in a way that is beneficial. And that's what, a broader view of this drishti issue is.
Yeah, so the drishti is, it's almost like you smile with your eyes, but that smile is not like something you do for a selfie, but it has to do with your relationships to all beings. And so it's a connection of compassion or friendliness to all beings. That's the drishti. So in good drishti, the tongue becomes quiet. It merges with the palate, which is Kachari Mudra for yoga practitioners. And it's like smiling, it's, if you say it's smiling, then if we take that too literally, you'll just be walking around with this
kind of creepy eyes,
creepy smile on your face, thinking, "Look, worship me, I could smile."
Well, you used to always say, and you haven't said this so much recently, but you used to talk about, releasing the palate as sort of the Mona Lisa smile.
Oh, the Mona Lisa.
And I have always loved that. And in a sense, it's almost like the Mona Lisa smile. If you put that into the eyes, it's like the lotus eyes, which are just, and we're fortunate here in Thailand to have lotus flowers that, we feed and take care of, and they are just almost always in bloom. And when the water is clean and when the water is still and maintained, they're beautiful, and they have these different phases that they go through. And then when the winds, which would be, of course, our minds, when they come, even if it's a very strong flower, immediately, boom, all the petals are gone. And so it's this real representation. The lotus eyes are this representation of the capacity we have to train the mind to become still and sink into the core of the heart, where the present moment is most tender and most accessible, if we're willing to wake up to that. And we have. Did you want to talk about the practice of looking that you were with the candle that you were talking
Oh,
about?
right. That's a nice.
That's something you could do to
This
really
is
cultivate this drishti.
yeah, and it's called Trataka, and I guess it's most famous for when you are sitting in a place where there's not a lot of wind. It doesn't work well,
And not too much light.
and not too. But you take a candle, and you light a candle, and you put it out in front of you. A meter, or it depends on the space you're in and how big a candle. And you put it up relatively high, just below the horizon level. And then you sit straight and you just relax your mouth, go into the breath, and just gaze without blinking. And so then, that's the instruction in the different.
Is it in the Hatha Pradipika? Is that
It's
one
in
of the
Hatha
places?
Pradipika,
Yeah.
but it's
Many places.
yeah. You just don't blink, and what'll happen is if you don't blink, is your eye gets dry, and you start crying. So you don't blink until you start crying, and it's not usually not emotional at that
Teary.
point, but it's like, and then you close your eyes, but then you close your eyes really softly, and the impression on your retina of what you've been looking at, the complementary opposite appears. So this is the retina becomes saturated if the eyes don't move with whatever the pattern is that you're looking at. And this rarely happens, but you can do this, with just looking out at anything. If you just gaze,
It happens, yeah, if you just easily
and
with anything.
then if you softly close your eyes, the whole pattern reappears in complementary opposite colors. And you can hold that pattern still for a few minutes, actually. And then that holding of the pattern with the eyes closed, that's the prataka, the practice. And it's very calming.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to do if you're,
Your eyes are all over the place.
if your eyes are all over the place, or if you're in a hurry.
And it's a demonstration of how important it is to let the gaze and the mind become steady, so that you can use all of the senses and the intelligence in their refined forms. And as we do more and more yoga, one of the things that happens is we become more and more sensitive. And so that can sometimes throw us off in terms of becoming more settled and all of that. And so having some practices where you either just really envision something like lotus eyes, or you envision this idea of tenderness inside, or even just looking deeply into the eyes of someone else and imagining that as someone who you don't have some kind of agenda with. They don't need anything from you, you don't need anything from them, but someone who, like you, has just woken up to this moment, and there's this mysterious, like we were saying in the beginning, this mysterious thing, almost like looking at clouds in the sky where, you see things change. Maybe there's a fleeting moment when the elephant turns into a dog that you have a little bit of panic, and then you say,
in the clouds.
In the clouds.
Yeah.
And then you adjust. And cultivating that capacity to look softly is where the gaze becomes profound. It's simple when you use the drishti, like Nasagara drishti the postures, but when you use that to soften and to embrace everything, that's when it...
Throughout the whole day.
Throughout the day.
And night.
Yeah, not there yet, but I'm getting there.
Yeah.
Trying. I'm aiming there. Yeah, lucid dreaming would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Possible.
So, anyway, so there's actually more that we could say about it, but we've kept you for about an hour. Yeah. So we will perhaps do another talk to pick up some loose ends and carry on a bit more and give some more practices. But we would love to leave you with the idea of, soft gaze and sharing that softness with others, and a softness that is also precise. So it's not just zoning out. It's a softness that has integrity.
Mm-hmm. Clarity, yeah.
Clarity. Yeah. So, thank you so much. We will see you next time.